Former FBI Director James Comey has been indicted by a federal grand jury in Virginia. The former bureau chief is charged with 1 count of making a false statement and 1 count of obstruction of a congressional proceeding. Comey has denied any wrongdoing, but if convicted, he faces up to 5 years in prison. This case stems from this 2020 Judiciary Committee hearing with Senator Ted Cruz asking Comey about this.
Chairman Grassley asked you point blank, quote, "Have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation?" You responded under oath, quote, "Never." So your testimony is you've never authorized anyone to leak. And Mr. McCabe, if he says contrary, is not telling the truth. Is that correct?
Again, I'm not going to characterize Andy's testimony, but mine is the same today.
We're going to dig into the details there, but this case was brought by Lindsay Halligan, who's the president's newly sworn-in, hand-picked replacement for the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia. Career prosecutors in that office tried to advise against these charges in a memo to Halligan earlier this week, citing a lack of evidence. The previous U.S. attorney resigned after the president said he should be fired in part for his refusal to bring this case, citing insufficient evidence. Comey was one of 3 prominent critics that the president specifically named in a social media post addressed to the attorney general, pushing her to pursue cases against these people. Ahead of yesterday's indictment, Trump said he could have gotten involved in this case if he wanted to.
We have very professional people headed up by the attorney general and Todd Blanche and Lindsay Halligan, who's a very smart, good lawyer, very good lawyer. They're going to make a determination. I'm not making that determination. I think I'd be allowed to get involved if I want, but I don't really choose to do so. I can only say that Comey's a bad person. He's a sick person. I think he's a sick guy, actually. He did terrible things at the FBI. And but I don't know. I have no idea what's going to happen.
After the charges were handed down, the president celebrated on social media, writing in part, "Justice in America. One of the worst human beings this country has ever been exposed to is James Comey, the former corrupt head of the FBI." The attorney general and director of the FBI also posted these statements, writing, "No one's above the law." Comey responded to the charges defiantly in a video he posted on social media.
My family and I have known for years that there are costs to standing up to Donald Trump. But we couldn't imagine ourselves living any other way. We will not live on our knees, and you shouldn't either. My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent. So let's have a trial and keep the faith.
Comey's arraignment is set for October 9th. He'll appear before U.S. District Court Judge Michael Nachmanoff, who's an appointee of President Biden. Let's take a look, though, at the closer events of the series of events leading up to this indictment, though, because they're really important. On September 19th, then U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, Eric Siebert, announced he resigned from his position. The next day, on September 20th, President Trump posted on social media that actually he'd fired Siebert, in part for refusing to bring charges against James Comey and the New York Attorney General Letitia James. Later that day, Trump wrote directly to the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, questioning why some of his top political opponents, including Comey and James, had not yet been charged with crimes. The following day, September 21st, Trump handpicked his former lawyer, Lindsay Halligan, who has no prosecutorial experience, to replace Siebert as the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. 2 days later, Halligan was sworn in to that role. On Wednesday, MSNBC reported that the DOJ was considering charging Comey, but that career prosecutors in the office had filed a memo trying to convince Halligan there wasn't enough evidence to do so. Yesterday, the DOJ moved forward, formally indicting Comey on 2 counts. The 5-year statute of limitations was looming over all of this, and it was set to expire on Tuesday. Democrats are, of course, sounding off about this indictment, claiming the president is weaponizing the Justice Department to go after his most prominent critics. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries issued this statement last night, calling the indictment a, quote, disgraceful attack on the rule of law. That sentiment was echoed by several other Democratic members of Congress. Meanwhile, Republicans are praising the charges. Senator John Cornyn of Texas called the indictment serious, saying Comey's accountability for FBI abuses during the first Trump term are long overdue. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina also responded to these charges on Fox News last night. Graham was a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee when Comey had his hearing that's at the center of all of this back in 2020.
When I questioned him 5 years ago, I didn't believe a word he told me. I don't believe it's possible for the director of the FBI not to know that the subsource who gave the information about the Russian dossier, recanted it, and it never got up to him.
We need a lawyer to break this down. Thank goodness Danny Cevallos, our NBC News and MSNBC legal analyst, is with us to start off. Danny, what we're talking about here are two charges. One is on obstruction. The other is on false statements. And you wrote a really good Substack talking about what you see in these charges and what it says about the larger case that's being built here. Talk to us about, A, if you were surprised that the grand jury returned two indictments in this case, and B, what you see that it's these two specific charges.
Yes, first of all, I was not surprised, and I'm very concerned, like many people are, of all the facts that you just recited, that this was essentially a prosecution that was directed by the president. But look, I am the first legal analyst of what will be many legal analysts today. Most of those other legal analysts, however, will be former federal prosecutors, brilliant people, and they will say things like James Comey's a good man, he's an honorable guy, and that this is a perversion of justice. And you know what? I'm inclined to agree with all of that. But here's the thing. The charges themselves, as you mentioned, Section 1001, false statements, and then 1505 being used essentially as a false statements to Congress charge. For me, red flags anytime you see those as the lead or main charges or the standalone charges. Often when they're part of a bunch of other more serious charges, it's a different story. But when they're alone, that tells me at least this could be a political prosecution. And you're going to hear a lot of other people echo that today. The difference, I think, is this. If the Section 1001 is this ticky-tack charge, and that's a criminal defense attorney term, if it's a ticky-tack charge, then was it a ticky-tack charge when it was used against Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, Alex van der Zwaan, the list goes on, Michael Flynn? All of those were people for whom the lead charge was a Section 1001 prosecution. So as a criminal defense attorney, I'm concerned anytime there is a standalone Section 1001 or a 1505, this obstruction, basically lying to federal authorities charges. Those have a huge potential for abuse, and they have a huge potential for abuse across the board. Don't get me wrong. The facts that you described of President Trump essentially directing the prosecution of a political foe, deeply, deeply concerning, and we cannot emphasize that enough.
I think you're right, and I appreciate the way that you're talking to us about the way that we have heard these charges used before. I was reading your piece this morning, and you say it was weaponized then against these other Trump allies and people in his orbit. It's being weaponized now, which makes it seem, as it does in so many other cases that we talk about on this show, like it's just a race to the bottom, and all of the norms and guardrails are gone. But I think the role of the president here, and when you lay it out of what has happened just in the last week to try to push these charges along, you've got the competing interest in the Eastern District of Virginia saying, we don't have the evidence to charge this. Right. And the president saying, no, but you're going to have to, basically. I mean, does that complicate the upcoming prosecution for a woman who's the head of this district, by the way, who doesn't have prosecutorial experience at all?
Yes and no. All those things you described, once an indictment is returned, these are very difficult charges to fight. Now, of course, I think we're going to see a defense of these were not false statements, and even if they were, I didn't make them intentionally. Expect maybe a motion for selective prosecution. Those have about a 1 or a 0% chance of winning, even though they're brought often in these political cases. They're very hard to win. All the factors you described make this a very concerning prosecution. But once indicted, folks are about to learn, if they haven't already, that the federal government has a well over 90% conviction rate because these federal statutes are relatively easy to convict on. And these in particular, false statements and 1505, they are, in my view, some of the most easy to abuse for that exact reason. Look out for these nebulous statutes. They've been weaponized before and potentially weaponized in the future.
I'm glad that you're the lawyer who's starting us off today. I will say I've listened to several others overnight and into this morning who are talking about the vindictive prosecution piece and the way that that might be used by Comey, that if there were a moment that you could really try to make that work in court, that this might be the one to do it. I mean, Andrew Weissman, of course, saying on our air last night, as bad as tonight is, he has some optimism about what could happen once this actually gets into the legal system. For now, we're going to leave it there, but we're going to continue this conversation throughout the day. NBC News and MSNBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos, thank you, as always, for starting us off.